Welcome to the 7th in our Seriously Pro Flight Controller series. In this video we're actually going to add an on-screen display onto the craft. So far in the video series we've done things like set up the board, configure it, done our test flight. We've also done things like add the buzzer, check the VBAT, we've talked about the modes, and in the last video we actually installed a little GPS receiver as well. So this time we're going to be setting up this little board here. This is called a MinimOSD. There are lots of different versions available. This is one that we've used a lot on the channel for different things. We've plugged it into NAS-A32, CC3Ds. We can even use it on things like APMs and Pixhawks as well. It's only about 10 quid. You can get them from loads and loads of different places. If you just Google MinimOSD, you shall find it. And the board's job is to fit between the camera and the video transmitter. So here's the FPV setup that goes on the top of this model. We have a camera at the front connected by a cable into a video transmitter that sends the signal down to our FPV goggles. This device actually sits in between the camera connection and the actual transmitter itself, and also connects to the Seriously Pro flight controller and talks to Clean Flight and hears information about battery voltage, position, mode, GPS lock, all those other things as well, and displays those as little graphics on the screen. So what we're going to do in this video is we're actually going to first of all talk about the software that you need. You need several little bits of software to set this little guy up. You're going to need the firmware that's going to go on it itself, and we're also going to need some Arduino software too to actually put that firmware onto the board. We're also going to need our trusty FTDI adapter. So if you don't have an FTDI adapter, then it's useful having one. We're going to use it again today. And then we're going to actually finish setting up the on-screen display. We'll connect to it using its own graphical user interface. We'll configure the display how we want it to look, upload the fonts, and then we'll jump onto the Seriously Pro, configure it and let it know that it's going to have an OSD plugged in, and then we'll plug the OSD into the Seriously Pro S3, and then finally we'll show it all working. So the first thing we need to talk about is what we're actually going to need. So let's jump onto the netbook. I'll open web browser and we'll have a look at where we're going to get all the software from. So netbook time. So there are two things that we need to download in order to be able to set up our little MinimOSD. The first thing is going to be the actual firmware itself, which is called MWOSD. So if you go to MWOSD.com, you'll find this page. I'll put the link in the description. And the nice thing is it does support an awful lot of different operating systems for flight controllers. So good on MultiWii that I love, and also Clean Flight as well. So we can actually pick the one that we want. So down here we're going to click on MWOSD downloads page, and we're going to click the latest version. Now the latest version as it stands right now is MultiWii OSD release 1.5, came out in the middle of August. So we're going to click on that and then we can download it onto our machine. Once we've done that, to show you what that looks like, it comes as a zip file, and what's in the zip file is this directory. I've just put it on the desktop for speed, and in here is two things. We have two directories. One is the MultiWii OSD firmware itself. We're going to have to edit that and ready to flash it to the board. And then secondly, there's also the graphical user interface, which is the little program we're going to use on the computer to set it up so it looks the way we want it to. Great thing is it also comes in not only Windows but also Mac OS X and Linux versions too. So that's the first thing we've got. Next thing we need, in case we haven't got it, we need to download the Arduino code as well. You're going to need this to actually connect to the board, compile those files we've just looked at into code that can be then sent onto the OSD itself. We're going to need to go to download, and we're going to need to download the Arduino software. Now, word of caution here, the latest and greatest version is 1.6.5. Now 1.6.5 is fine, but I would recommend, if you're doing these kind of things, it's also worthwhile looking at the previous releases. I like using the very first kind of classic Arduino 1.0.x. I think it's 1.0.5 on here. because if you use the latest versions, sometimes they're expecting some of the older code to have things in that they don't, and they hiccup. So you can try 1.6.5, download that first, or you can actually download a previous version. I'd recommend, if you're going to have a crack at it, go for Arduino 1.0x. Download and install both of those onto whatever it is that you're using. And the next thing we need to talk about then is how we're going to connect the FTDI adapter onto our MinimOSD board so that we can plug it into the USB cable and start connecting and configuring everything. So let's go back to the bench and I'll show you how that works. Connecting the FTDI to this board is really straightforward. With some of the other things that we're doing in the series, like the GPS, we're having to make cables and all kinds of bits and pieces up. With this, it's really straightforward. If we look on the back of the MinimOSD, it's clearly labelled which is which, so you have the transmit, receive, plus 5 volts, ground, black and green at each end. If you look at the top of the FTDI adapter, you can see that it's called black and green each side. You can see clearly which is 5 volts and everything else. So all you need to do is match the black and green with the black and green on the board, which for me means that the FTDI adapter just pops on the end like that. So now, rather than just being a standalone board, we have a USB connection that we can pop into. So all I need now is a USB cable, and I need to just plug one end of it into the actual MinimOSD. And now I can plug this into the laptop, and we can start the Arduino code, load up the MultiWii-OSD firmware, and make the couple of changes we need before we flash it onto the board. So let's go back to the netbook. I'll also do a little bit of filming of this setup on the side so you can see how the lights look when we do things like uploading the code. So back to the netbook. So the first thing we'll do is we'll actually start Arduino, because we'll have to have that running, and then we'll have a look at the firmware. And as you can see, we're actually running 1.0.5. It's the very old version that I've got here, but you know what? It works every time. So what we'll do is we'll go File, Open, we'll navigate onto our desktop. We'll select the Scarab OSD Release 1.5 folder. We'll go into MultiWii-OSD, and we're looking for a file that has the same name as the folder. There it is, multiwiiosd.ino. We double click on that one. Click Open, and there's the sketch that we're interested in. Now, just like a lot of the other Arduino code that we've looked at on the channel, everything that you need to set up and change is in config.h. So all of these different tabs hold all of the code and the different pieces, but the only one we're interested in is this one in here. So what we're going to do is I'll just scroll down very quickly and show you the differences and changes you need to make in order to prepare this firmware for flashing onto the board. So the first thing we're going to do is just make sure the OSD hardware settings is set for the right board. Ours is a MinimOSD. So the way you change things here is if we were using something like a Arduino, we would just delete that and then put 2 slashes in front of that one. That means if it's got the 2 slashes, it's commented. If it hasn't got 2 slashes, those are the ones that the firmware is going to use. So these are just like little switches. It looks far more complicated than it actually is. And then we go down here. Next one we need to do, we need to select the controller software. And the controller software we're interested in is obviously going to be CleanFlight. So I've uncommented CleanFlight. Be careful though, because further down here there are older versions of CleanFlight as well. Obviously we're not using those because we're using the Seriously Pro flight controller, which needs 1.9 or later. So it's actually commented in here about that. So we've got CleanFlight selected. Go down to the next bit. Aircraft type is going to be either a rotorcraft for multi-rotors or fixed wing. Rotorcraft is right for us. Hardware current sensor settings, we can leave those, although we're not going to turn them on. It doesn't really matter. On-screen switch settings. Now we can actually have a switch on our transmitter and use that to change the OSD that we're looking at. So we can have multiple screens typically, and you can turn them on and off. So we're going to leave that set as the default. We're going to leave everything else as default. We're not going to change a thing. The only thing we're noticing here is the baud rate is set to 115-200. We'll need to remember that when we come to set up clean flight so that it knows the speed to talk to it is. Everything else is going to be standard, so that all looks good to me. So now we've got the code ready, what we're going to do is we're actually going to flash it onto the board. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that the board is set right. So we're going to select the board for a little one, something like a Pro Mini, 5 volts, 16 megahertz with 18 mega 328. At the moment it was not giving us a serial port because we haven't got the board plugged in. So my next job then is to actually plug the board in. So let me just set that up, and then I'll also start the camera so we can see the LEDs flashing and you can watch what happens when I flash it to the board. So there's the insert in the corner. I'm going to plug the board into the computer now. So there we have the OSD powered on, and just make sure that you have the two little solder pads. There's one at the front and one at the back at the bottom that actually pass the 5 volts from the FTDI to the other side. Make sure that those little solder pads are done, and the FTDI adapter, at the moment we're just getting the odd little flash. So hopefully now if we go back into tools we should find that our board is ready. So we've got tools, serial port COM7, fantastic, it's found it. So now we're going to say click on upload, and the first thing it will do is actually compile the code. So it's taking all of this software here and turning it into something that can be flashed onto the board. So depending on the speed of your actual PC, this can take a couple of minutes. So this is a chance to sit and have a cup of coffee while it's finishing. As soon as it's finished compiling the sketch, it'll start uploading, and we'll see the lights on the FTDI adapter start flashing like crazy as it uploads it. There it goes, it's been pushed up. Once it's finished, we'll see the board reboot. There we go, done uploading. So now the board has the new version of firmware on it. So we can come out of the Arduino software and we can actually unplug the board, because we'll like to do a nice hard reboot, because next time we come back in we're going to come back in and actually configure it with the graphical user interface. The next thing we need to do is now actually configure the OSD so it'll work. So we're going to plug the OSD back into the computer. All the lights will come back on. So we have the OSD flashing, and the FTDI adapter won't be doing anything right now. But what we'll do is we'll start the on-screen display graphical user interface. So we'll go back into the directory. This time we'll go into GUI. I'm on Windows 32, so we'll go in there and we'll click on MWOSD GUI. Okay, so here is the interface. So we're going to connect on COM7. We're just going to click on the COM7 up here, and here we have all of the detail. Now the first thing we need to do is we're just going to upload the font that we're going to want. So we're going to select the font. There's a number of fonts that actually come with it. We're going to pick default bold. Click open, and then we're going to select upload. Okay. So now that font file's loaded, we'll click upload, and that will now start uploading them all. And you should see that it'll kind of count through. So we're on 4, 5, it's got to do all 256, and you'll notice if we go back and zoom in that the little light is flashing as it's updating the fonts. If you don't update the fonts, then sometimes what can happen with these firmwares is the OSD is actually working, but because there's nothing in the font memory, it's actually not showing you the overlay. So always make sure you've done that step. So So now that's uploaded all of the fonts, now we can go through as we can just change all of these settings to be how we want. As we click on each of these, we'll find that the display will change and show us what we're doing. So main voltage, we're going to display the voltage on the bottom left hand corner. I'm going to use the flight controller voltage information to do that. Video voltage, not bothered about the amps, not particularly bothered about the RSSI either. Imperial, because I'm a UK guy. PAL, because all my information is PAL, not bothered about displaying any of these. Flight mode is good. Sensors, not bothered about. Gimbal, not bothered about. Variometer, not bothered about. Barometer altitude, not bothered about that. Timer, we'll keep that on actually. Not bothered about the side scrolling either. I think they can become a little bit cluttered. So we're starting to look like how I want it. So we're going to display the GPS, don't want the coordinates. Map mode we'll have as 2. The different map modes, have a look in the documentation. What that means is then it actually shows you graphically where this is either the craft and then home it appears, so it's like a radar view if you want to look, helps you find your way back home. I like it set to 2. Okay, so now we have everything set that we want, and that's how it's going to look when it comes on the display. We're actually going to click on Write OSD controls. We'll click on Restart. That should make everything reboot. We'll read the OSD controls back. And now we can just confirm that everything appears the way we want it to, and that is looking perfect. So again, 115200 is a baud rate, COM7, that's how we have it all configured. You can set it up as to how you particularly like it, what makes sense for you. Now I've done that, we can unplug it, and we need to talk about how we're going to connect it to the Seriously Pro 3. So let's talk about that, and then we'll jump back into Clean Flight and do the configuration before we plug everything home. So if you watched the previous video in the series where we did the GPS connections, this will look familiar. This is an extract from the current Clean Flight manual, and let me just highlight the bits that we're interested in. We're going to connect the OSD into UART1. Now UART1 is actually a 4-pin connector on the front of the board, just near the USB connector. As you can see, it's clearly labelled here, and also at the bottom it actually says that it's designed for OSD use, so that's perfect for us. There are a couple of connections that we need to make with our little MinimOSD. The first is to the flight controller itself. So we're going to connect it into that UART connector, and it goes looking as it is right now, and it's screen printed on the board, which is great. It's ground plus 5 volts, transmit and receive, and we need to connect the ground wire to the ground wire on the MinimOSD, plus 5 volts to VCC, the transmit to receive, and receive to transmit, just like we did again with the FTDI adapter and the other things that we've done so far. Once we've done that, then that's all the connections that we need to make to the Seriously Pro 3. One thing I will point out though, in the notes it does say that the UART1 can not be used at the same time as something plugged into the USB port. So we are going to have to be aware of that. In future, once we've connected this up, if we want to plug the board back into USB to look at something like black box data recordings or something else, we are going to have to pop the cable off the back of the MinimOSD so that that doesn't cause us a problem. That's not a big deal, but we just need to be aware of that. The other side of the MinimOSD needs to be connected between the camera and the video transmitter. So in this little diagram here we have our MinimOSD not connected to anything, we have our little transmitter power line going up to the video transmitter, and then the camera plugged into it. This is a simple 5-volt system. Typically things like Immersion and Fat Shark tend to run on 5 volts. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to plug the video out of the camera into video in on the MinimOSD, and we're going to plug the video out on the MinimOSD up into the video transmitter. So what that will allow the MinimOSD to do is to take all of the telemetry data that it's receiving from the Seriously Pro 3, translate that into on-screen images and graphics using the setup that we've just done, and then overlay that on the image and then pump that image out into the video transmitter so we can see it. So this is how we're actually going to connect it. I've already made up a couple of little cables that make this really straightforward. So I plug the camera into video in and I plug the video transmitter into video out. So let's go back to the bench and get everything ready to plug it into the Seriously Pro 3. But because we're about to connect via the USB to configure CleanFlight, I'm not going to make the final connections onto UART1 until I've actually configured that. So let's just have a quick look at those physical connections. So we have one cable that's going from UART1 into one side of the MinimOSD, just as we've seen, and then on the other side what we've got is we've got the video in from the camera and then the video out from the MinimOSD going into our little video transmitter. So that should be enough. The other point I'll mention here is that the plus 5 volts is actually going straight from the camera to the actual video transmitter itself. I haven't tried to do anything with the voltage on this side. If you want to know more about that and how that works, watch one of my other MinimOSD videos that has time to go into more detail about the power system on here. For now, all I'd say is, look, make sure that you're not putting any voltages on this side of the board and have those two little solder blobs done. So that's all the cabling there is really. We've plugged it into UART1 and we've plugged it into the camera and the video transmitter. However, I'm going to unplug everything from UART1 because what I'm going to do now is we're going to go back onto CleanFlight and we'll tell CleanFlight that it now has an on-screen display that it needs to talk to. Back to the netbook for the last time. So in CleanFlight, the first thing we need to do is just make sure we have telemetry turned on so the on-screen display can actually work. So the way it works, if we look in ports, you'll notice already that UART1 that we've now connected the on-screen display into is already configured for MSP at 115200. Now the MSP or multi-way serial protocol is what's actually being talked out of the USB cable. So that's already configured. So we don't have to actually set anything up for telemetry itself because the port UART1 is already talking MSP. That's what we want to talk to the on-screen display. It's already set for the right speed and everything. So the way it works is when the board initiates, it will start talking MSP over the USB connection, and that's actually what we're using right now to talk to the Seriously Pro F3. And then when the board is armed, then the telemetry will start to kick in, and what happens, the on-screen display actually pulls the MSP telemetry from UART1, so we don't have to set it up in here. If we were going to install it and configure it on any of the other UARTs, then we'd actually have to select the MSP protocol from one of those. But as we've installed it on UART1, it should already all be taken care of. So save and reboot. What we'll do is jump into configuration and we'll go down here and just make sure that telemetry is turned on. Then save and reboot again, and then you should be almost there. So here's everything set back up and put back together. You'll notice I've actually had to mount my MinimOSD at the side here by the flight controller that's just starting to run out of room a little bit actually in the frame with all the electronics we're managing to cram in here now. So what we're going to do to test it, I'm just going to power it up. We have my Taranis already turned on. So let's turn on my FlySight Black Pearl first. That can just turn on. It's just going to show static initially because we have no signal. As soon as that's initialized and we have the static, I'm going to power up the model and we should see the on-screen display. So there's the overlay. And there is the on-screen display. And you can see it's the on-screen display. As I move the image, you can see the artificial horizon moving as well. And right now, if I just move that to the side slightly, I'll just show you what we've got on the display. There's the display as we saw it before. So at the moment it's giving me a little bit of a battery voltage warning. I might change that actually. That's 11.4 volts, it's fine. We've got a timer running. It's giving me a warning that we have low sats and we're disarmed. We're in stabilized mode. At the moment we have no satellites and we have our heading as well. So that's how you set up an on-screen display with a Seriously Pro F3. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.